Hey guys, welcome to Film Darkly. I'm your host, Anthony Pacino, and today I wanted to bring you a review of The Lighthouse. The Lighthouse is the latest Robert Eggers film. He's the director of The Witch, which came out a few years ago, or I believe it's supposed to be pronounced The Vitch, because it's has two V's to spell out the W, and it's meant to be kind of like, Old English, because the film is, an Old English movie. Like, all the characters speak Old English. It takes place during the Puritans, the time of the Puritans, so very early on, colonialization and stuff. And if you've never seen The Witch, I would highly recommend it. It's a very good movie. Very well made. I'll often bring it up when I talk about highbrow or really well made, horror films. And so Robert Eggers is kind of one of these guys that's been coming up along with Ari Aster, and obviously these two have brought us just these incredibly strange and bizarre horror films that are just some of the best movies we've ever seen, at least in my opinion, and most cinephiles kind of agree. Understandably, these movies are not always for general audiences. General audiences don't tend to go to the theater to see cinematic masterpieces. They tend to go to the theater because they want to be just entertained. You've probably heard a little bit about the whole Martin Scorsese, Francis Ford Coppola fiasco and what they said about the Marvel films. And really, I think their comments are transcend the Marvel films. I kind of get where they're coming from. In terms of like cinema and what makes real cinema and real artistic cinematic film, something like Avengers Endgame just doesn't rank up there. If I think of like the best movies I've seen this year in terms of like cinematic value, whether, acting and cinematography and story and the layers within the story, Endgame doesn't even rank. Like, I don't even think about it. If I think of the most entertaining and fandom film for me, it's like, yeah, Endgame's right there. It's like number one. Well, we'll see what I think of Star Wars, but Rise of Skywalker. But I mean, yeah, I'll think about it. But my point being is, like, when I think of like the best films this year, my mind immediately goes to movies like Midsommar and even Joker. Joker's a little bit more higher end, as you might say, because it's less indie, but it's still like has very good cinematic quality to it. Todd Phillips did a great job with it, and it's better than any Marvel film that's ever come out, because Marvel's never really produced anything Oscar worthy, besides the fact that Black Panther was somehow nominated for an Oscar, which is quite possibly one of the most ridiculous and silly nominations in history, although I'm sure there's been some other movies that have been nominated that just didn't deserve it. Like Get Out. Get Out didn't really deserve it, in my opinion. So it happens. Hollywood kind of has a thing right now, or Oscars for sure have a thing right now where they're definitely trying to make their nominations diverse, and so they're reaching out for anything with diversity, regardless of how good it is, just more or less how popular it is within the zeitgeist, so to speak. So anyways, let's get back to Lighthouse. The Lighthouse is directed by Robert Eggers, like I mentioned, and it stars William Dafoe as Thomas Wake and Robert Pattinson as Ephraim Winslow. This film is so interesting. Now, before I saw this movie, somebody had said that they thought it was better than Midsommar. And that was an interesting little thing for them to say, because Midsommar has been quite possibly my favorite movie this year. I don't really put... I don't necessarily put Joker above it. I think Joker had better acting, but I don't think Joker's a better movie. I don't even put Once Upon a Time in Hollywood above it, which I do think Once Upon a Time in Hollywood's a great film. Midsommar to me was a very good movie, and I saw it 3 times in theaters. Third time was the director's cut, which was nearly 3 hours long, and I enjoyed that movie immensely. And I continue to rewatch it because it had so much value to me as a movie. There was so much depth in there. I just really like what Ari Aster's doing, and it's not as if there's some sort of bias. I mean, this movie, I'm going in because of a director, and sometimes I see movies because of directors. Sometimes David F. Sandberg, I'll probably see everything he puts out because I've been following him. And so far I've seen all 3 of his movies, Lights Out, Annabelle Creations, and Shazam. So anyhow, going back to, to this whole thing about, I thought it was intriguing to say it's better than Midsommar. So I kind of prepped myself. I'm like, oh, it might be. Robert Eggers' The Witch is very good. I don't even know if I like it. I don't know if I like it more than Hereditary or Midsommar, but I definitely like it quite a bit. So I'm like, I don't know what I think of it. So first of all, this movie is shot in an interesting way. I believe it's shot in 35 millimeter. I think I probably won't be able to find it right here, but it's essentially like the screen looks very small. It's a very, very small screen. It's like a square shaped screen, and I believe it's supposed to be because it was filmed in 35 millimeter, but don't quote me on that as being accurate. I'm trying to find out right now. Not really seeing it. Anyhow, so it's shot a particular way, and it is in black and white. It's a black and white film. And that's another interesting aspect, which at first it kind of makes you wonder, is this going to bother me because I'm not used to this? But you right away just sort of get used to it, and you sort of, oddly enough, you implement color when you watch stuff. You sort of add color, and you don't realize you're doing it. So you start watching the movie, and then sometimes you have to remind yourself, oh, this is black and white, because you're sort of adding in color because you know what color things are supposed to be. So that's one of the interesting factors about this film. It's essentially about 2 men who are on this rock where this lighthouse is, and Robert Pattinson is basically being hired for 4 weeks to help out William Dafoe's character, who is this lighthouse keeper. And it starts out with the 2 of them trying to converse, Pattinson having a hard time, because Dafoe's character is essentially, the boss of him, and has all these rules and doesn't want anybody to work in the lighthouse except him. And so there's something weird about the lighthouse. And the movie essentially is, my best description for it is a spiral into madness. It's very Lovecraftian in that sense. It never spoils what's really going on. You feel like it might be supernatural, but you don't really know if it is. It can easily be all mental, all within someone's mind. And it has an incredibly interesting ending that's not unlike you might expect. But it's an ending that is sort of fulfilling of this spiral. And I think it's a movie that you have to see more than once if you really want to dissect it. Well, obviously if you want to dissect it, but I should say if you want to understand it. Because there's so much packed within it. Not necessarily hidden things in the back of, in scenes and whatnot, so, like Midsommar or Hereditary. There's a lot of stuff that's sort of hidden in the background. And so if you really pay attention to those films, you kind of get, with Midsommar, the whole movie's essentially spelled out for you before you see the movie. So it actually kind of telegraphs everything. Hereditary doesn't necessarily do that, but Hereditary has a lot of subtle things you just don't notice, subtle horrors that you don't notice. And those subtle horrors are kind of what makes it scary, because even though you don't realize they're there, it's sort of like subconsciously you do. And it's one of the factors that kind of just makes the movie a little terrifying. The Lighthouse, I felt like it was less terrifying, but more intriguing to watch the madness unfold. And that was one of the things that was interesting about it. But it definitely explores many, many aspects and many things. And it definitely makes you think, and it makes you wonder. It is a bit of a major slow burn, as most of Edgar's and Aster, for that matter, their movies are. Their movies tend to be slow burns. The Lighthouse is definitely a slow burn. But I would say that as the Lighthouse spirals, you kind of get more and more into it. And it's just a fascinating film. It's kind of different than I expected it to be. Definitely a different movie than I expected it to be. But not in a bad way. It's a good movie. It's solid. It's definitely one of the best I've seen this year. I wouldn't say it is the best. And Edgar's essentially did everything he intended on doing. This movie was his intention. It was what he wanted, and the movie, and that's what came out. And there's just, that's just really the best way I could put it. In that sense, I want to very much so give it a 5 out of 5. Because Robert Pattinson is fantastic. William Dafoe's fantastic. The story's fantastic. It accomplishes what it's trying to accomplish. The cinematography's fantastic in that it's black and white, and you still feel into the movie. You still see the colors the way you're supposed to see the colors, so to speak. And it's just a wonderfully made film. It's beautiful. It's a beautifully made film, and it's definitely a cinematic masterpiece. And it's one of those, art pieces that you have to see. It kind of baffles me sometimes, because there's a lot of horror fans out there who will say, "Oh, I'm so into horror," but everything they watch is like slashers and torture porn and just gore fest type films. And it's like, what about these movies that like really strike at the heart of true fear? Like, that's true fear. True fear is things that terrify you, not because of what could happen. Like, everyone's afraid of it. Oops, I hit the box, so there's going to be noise there. Anyways, everybody's afraid of a car accident. Everybody's afraid of their body getting ripped to pieces, some guy running in a room and shooting you or stabbing you or whatever. We're all afraid of weird things like that. Go to Yosemite and you fall, or a tree branch breaks and hits your head and knocks you out and kills you. There's like always like that type of horror, but there's something about the horror of becoming insane. The horror of like your family falling apart because of emotional means. Those types of things are real horror. Like if I were to tell you, hey, how would you choose to die? By going insane, ending up in a psychiatric home, and then slowly dying over time as your mind unravels, or you get shot? You might choose getting shot. And so it's like, you think of a movie like Terrifier, and then you think of a movie like The Lighthouse, and I can tell you right now, The Lighthouse is far more terrifying than Terrifier. Terrifier is just torture porn. It's just gore. It's just an insane clown who runs around killing people for no reason. But The Lighthouse, like, you can put yourself in that scenario, and that would be terrifying to be there. That's a different kind of horror. And I wish more people were watching that kind of horror. Because, or even like Midsommar, where you have Danny's character who's essentially in this horrific situation, but for her, it's a fairy tale of wish fulfillment to fulfill her codependency. Whereas her friends, it's this folk horror. It's this, I went to this cult and these bad things are happening to me. And that's interesting, right? It's interesting to see horror unfold that way. Even The Witch, very fascinating in the way the horror unfolds. The horror of the unknown, of not really understanding what's happening. And then getting this ending that's so fascinating and interesting. That's horror. Not this other stuff. Not scary stories to read in the dark or whatever that movie is called. That was just a crap movie. Anyways, not like that. Like, this is true horror. And these are the kind of horror movies that I'm just in love with right now. I'm really in love with them. And my last little short film I made Worthy, isn't even a horror, but it has an aspect to it that's somewhat scary because of just the way I made it unfold. And it was one of the reasons why I was proud of it. Nobody's seen it. I don't intend on putting it out there for people to watch maybe later down the line. But I was proud of it. I was. It's the first short I'd done where I was really proud of it. Because it did what I wanted it to do. And I think that that's what every director's after. At least most. I got told recently that making movies is for your audience, writing something for your audience, keeping your audience in mind. They say you could put yourself in the story, but then it's all about the audience, and I couldn't disagree more. You look at a movie like Hereditary, Midsommar, or The Lighthouse, or The Witch, all by two different directors, and just ask yourself, like, who are those movies made for? They're not made for teens. They're not made for young adults. They're not made for the elderly. They're just artistic pieces. And A24 has the confidence in these individuals to put out artistic pieces that can make back their money, and they always do. Because they're generally cheap films in the first place. And there's cinephiles like me who will see them more than once. I don't ever intend on making movies for audiences. I intend on making movies for me. Telling the stories I want to tell and not targeting any audiences. I don't care if you don't get my movie. I don't care if you don't understand it. It's just not for you. If you need someone to explain it to you and then you can go back and love it, great. But if you need someone to explain it to you and then you never enjoy it, I'm okay with that. I don't write or make movies for everyone else. I make them because I'm an artist. And that's my medium for my art. And I'm just hoping to get better by getting better paintbrushes and better paint. And that's a metaphor for crew and cast. But that's what I have to do, and money. So I'm working right now on my werewolf horror film, and I'm actually sprucing it up at the moment. I'm rewriting it and reworking it, and I'm going to make it very creepy, and I'm going to do things that I've never done before. And the reason I'm going to do those things is because I'm tired of thinking of my audience. I'm just going to think of me. So anyways, I know it sounds selfish, but I really don't care if it does. Filmmaking kind of is. So anyways, thanks for listening. By the way, The Lighthouse is, in my opinion, about a 10 out of 10, if not a 9.5 out of 10. Hope you enjoyed this. Like, share, subscribe, do all that sort of stuff. Comment, whatever, review. I don't even care if you hate me. Still review. Anyways, I'll talk to you later. Thanks for listening.